Welcome to episode 18 of the Moonbase podcast with IamShamtheMan. We get into a few different things about the Vagabond lifestyle and somewhat expand on the previous discussion. We also get into MMA, and it's all around a good time. So check it out and enjoy. But first, a quick segment that I'm hoping to keep on going on here, and that's called the Omegle Diaries. And here's a brief snippet of that.
Yo, so I learned how to talk like a dinosaur. Do you want to hear?
Let's hear it. That's kind of cool. I like that.
Yeah, I came up with it all by myself.
Yeah, like we're good to go. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome back. How have you been?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me again. I really appreciate those episodes we've done. Listened in. They're awesome. Really want to give a shout out to all the vagabonds and homeless people out there. Hopefully I didn't come across a certain way, giving my opinions. I'm here to support people's freedom to do as they please. I'm just kind of giving my input as to how I go about stuff. And I also really appreciate anybody listening in. Feel free to chime in. Please give this podcast a follow. I think what you're doing as a host is bringing up some really unique perspectives, and it should really, be broadcast as much as possible. So, again, thanks for anybody who's listening, period.
Oh, well, thanks for the shout out. I also appreciate all the work you've been doing and just sharing it. It's been definitely coming up in the numbers, like you can tell. There's a difference when people share it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think it's great to find a situation where it's mutual beneficial, like where everybody gets to win, and that's when I feel you share good content and you're sharing like an overall positive message as well. I think it's just bound to win. So, yeah, for me, what I've been doing is just trying to do a lot of temp work, and it fits perfectly into the lifestyle of what I'm doing, is being able to access work here and there that I need in order to fund this journey and continue onward. Other than that, obviously focused on my own social media, which is IamShamtheMan, one word, YouTube, TikTok, Reddit, Instagram, and then if you want to read an article, Google search Sham, S-H-A-M, Belt Mag, and I'm just expanding upon that. You've come along and given me a platform, but this is something that I'm gearing towards as I build myself up, getting myself, back into the gym and just better health overall and stability, mental health, addressing all that because I really intend on making a big onward push. So really for me, it's just work and social media and just doing whatever it takes to move forward. I think that's the biggest message I want to give anybody out there, especially struggling. Always get your mental health checked 100%. I'm going to be an advocate for the rest of my life, but always be looking to make some sort of move forward.
Yeah, whenever you get that platform set up, I'd be happy to shout it out and promote it how I can.
Oh, absolutely. Really appreciate it, man.
So, what, have you moved at all? So, what's this temp work looking like? Is it just odd jobs that you're finding, or is it through like a temp agency where you're getting different kinds of jobs?
So there's various apps here in America. There's InstaWork is probably the best well-known one. I go through something called Winomo as well. And jobs just pop up. They give you some sort of scheduled description, and then you accept them. Of course, you're competing with other people, so things are hit or miss. And you form your own schedule, essentially. You can cancel up without penalty for Winomo up to 12 hours before without being penalized. It's just a very nice, flexible way of dealing with things. It's menial work, almost always kind of a warehouse type of deal, which is fine because for me, if I'm going to do something basic, it's nice to be able to move around. So I convince myself I'm doing some sort of exercise, making some money, and you get paid out pretty quick as well. That's another nice little perk. And they generally have a pretty wide network. So anywhere in the world, anywhere in the U.S. I'm operating in, I can find a gig through various temp work apps, which again just makes it very convenient for me doing this lifestyle. And it's just another one of those little tips I give people, whether you're a vagabond, whether you want to get into it. This is a really big game changer in how the economy has moved towards essentially a lot of people becoming independent contractors.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I when I was down in the States, I looked into like TaskRabbit and stuff like that because I had a whole bunch of tools. Um, but at the time when I registered, you needed like your American equivalent of a SIN number.
Mm,
So, yeah.
yeah, exactly. I don't know how big Craigslist is anymore, but essentially it's like a forum board, and you can post help that you might need, and then somebody can respond. So let's say I go on that board and I see somebody needs some sort of help. Maybe there could be like a cash under the table type of deal. So that's also kind of another unconventional method to look for. That's the tough thing, because I do want to come to Canada, and part of me is saving a lot of money because I want to be able to do that trip, and I anticipate obviously not being able to work, through legal methods or whatever you want to call it. So it has me also thinking, hey, how can I kind of formulate, a plan for me when I do come to Canada? Let's say I do need money. Well, I'm going to have to operate under a table type of deal. But thankfully, I'm an electrician, and I'm physically capable. So hey, I can do some sort of moving work as well. If somebody's out there, on a forum, and they're saying we need a guy to help us move, and we're going to pay cash or whatever, sure, I can do that. But that's always in the back of my mind. When I'm traveling, you want to have some sort of access to income. Yeah.
One thing I could recommend is if you join Facebook groups for where you're going, um,
Mm.
depending on where you're at, if you look up the name of the city and then like handyman service or cash jobs or cash services, you can usually find a lot of people that'll be wondering. Like I've seen even ones where, um, like I'm not an electrician, but I've had people message me back for just moving like an outlet or something simple like that where they don't even really care if it's like up to code or standard. They just want whatever they want done.
That's a great idea, and I really appreciate the tip. And it's also helpful for us to reveal this stuff to listeners, since they're going to be curious, as to lifestyle. They're living their lifestyle, and it's like, now, wow, that's a big game changer for you to mention that. For me, it makes me more relaxed and knowing all these resources that are out there in terms of being able to make money. So thank you again. The funny thing is, of all the platforms, Facebook is the one, well, X or Twitter, whatever the hell you want to call it
And
now, is
Kijiji
the other one
too.
that makes me
Same
money.
deal. Like if you look on
Oh, I see.
Kijiji.
Yeah, so it's funny because I'm not on Facebook. I anticipate myself getting on it, but I think it's just a little bit like there's too much. I don't know how to word this, but there's a little like too much maybe social pressure interaction with Facebook. It seems like I don't know how to word it, because it was the first social media I had, but I don't know why I don't want to get on there. I think it's because maybe I might come across too many people from my past that have it, and now like the algorithm or whatever the hell is going to match you up with things in the past, and you're like, I kind of want to avoid those easy interactions, like to interact that easily. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
feel like the other social platforms, you're able to kind of dictate more so how you appear, like how accessible you are in a sense. Like it's not such a wide network. With Facebook, it's like, boom, somebody appears from 15 or 20 years ago, and you're like, I don't even want to appear, because when I left Corvallis, I disappeared, even from my job. I told the boss and stuff, but like one day Sham's here and he's gone, and I don't want to sit there and have to explain myself to dozens of people about me essentially just fleeing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, Kijiji's also another one, and that won't tie into anything that you've had going on before that. Like, it's
No,
not
I
like
think
WhatsApp where you put
okay.
your number in and people just know that you're on WhatsApp now, you know?
Yeah, the funny thing with WhatsApp is I went through that entire list and just blocked interactions I don't want. And this has nothing to do with negative interactions. There's no skeletons in my closet or anything crazy like that. It's when you come from a background of mental health and abuse and stuff like that, I tended to be like just socially avoidant, you know. So for me, it's been such a huge turnaround being able to open and talk freely and be comfortable. That I don't want to be put in another anxious situation of having to explain myself in a certain way until I'm ready, and I don't feel like ready to make this big presentation. So it's not about trying to hide anything evil or because these people are bad. It's just like, hey, I remove myself from the world so I can work on myself, and I don't want to reintroduce myself in a certain way until I'm ready. And that's basically the gist of it. So I'm definitely working on not running away so much. I think that's my biggest improvement is just being able to, face things head on. But hey, when you get treated for stuff like anxiety and you're able to calm down, the entire world changes. But at the same time, I'm still, changing to get to a certain point where I'm fully comfortable.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I'm very much like I'm going to appear different to people who I grew up with in the past. And again, that's because of treatment. I felt like I was a prisoner in my own body. So it's like, hey, wow, you have Sham who used to be hidden and now he's all out in the open doing his thing, showing this and that. Like, what's going on here? It's already kind of a shock.
They want
And
to
that's
like
just
confine you to what their belief of you is.
100. That is an exact thing that was in my mind. Like, I appreciate you coming up with the words, but that's what it is. It's like, oh, we thought we knew Sham, but it's like, no, this is who I am right now. This is really Sham the entire time. But I've been categorized a certain way because of my mental health struggles, and I didn't tell people about them. Now that it's been revealed, it's like, okay, maybe there's going to be some understanding, but first impressions and stuff are so strong. That's another also reason why I fled, is because I've always been this guy who's had so much talent. Not to toot my own horn, but I've been reserved. I kind of put myself in the corner. It's like, it's not because I'm shy or anything like that. It's just I didn't care enough to interact. And you're going to suffer in a workplace or opportunities since people might say, hey, like, this person doesn't really want to, like, be too involved. When in reality, I want to run the entire fucking project. Anything I do, I want to own that thing. I want to be at the forefront. That's who I am in terms of like a leadership thing. But I don't purposely take power. I wait for somebody who has authority to dictate that to reward me with that. But those people are not going to see somebody like me in the little corner. They're going to see some person who's trying to suck them off and give them that as a reward. So I'm not good at social games. I'm not good at sucking up to people and gaining positions, but that's generally how the Western system works. And a guy like me, I get penalized because I just don't want to deal with people's bullshit, or it's either like I'm really aggressive, I'm cussing you out or whatever, or I'm just avoidant, and I need to find a better mix. But we just seem to reward people who have really good people skills and are kind of like good at being fakers, and I've always felt like I've been penalized because I wasn't treated for my mental health, and I'm really excited to be able to go back. But people are going to have this vision of Sham, of either like he's aggressive or he doesn't give a shit, and that's not who I am. So I just felt like I was getting so penalized in life as opposed to getting rewarded on your talent. That's another reason why I fled.
I find I run into like a similar situation pretty often, and I also think though after a certain point of having like diverse experiences. Because if you think about it, most people haven't experienced half of what you've done. And like, if you talk to someone about urban exploring, chances are they're gonna think like, why is this guy going into abandoned buildings or whatnot? But like those defining experiences, a lot of people just can't connect to. And then you'll be on a job site or something and it just won't click for them, I guess, you know?
Absolutely. And yeah, I've just come across a lot of prejudice. And again, I take a lot of ownership for it being a byproduct of my mental health because I either came across it as being really aggressive. I've gotten into so many fights in my life. It's just how it is. Or I come across as I don't give a shit because I'm just off in a corner by myself. And a lot of it has to do, I can't do small talk. I'm not going to sit there and talk about idiotic things, but these are the things that have a psychological connection to somebody who is in authority. And wow, we feel good, buddy. Oh, a job opening comes up. I'm going to put you in this position. It's like, no, I've done like 5 times more than this person, you know? And now it's a destructive cycle because now I get even more pissed off. It's like, and I realize that's why I tell people in a previous podcast, I mentioned that we need to kind of not say F the system, and we need to find a better way to work within it. So I can't go in and just start going buck wild on the power structure, the hierarchy, or the company I'm working with. I have to be like, no, Sham, we're not going to win that battle. What you can do is change the way that you can communicate and develop your skills even more and more to a point where things are just undeniable. And that's why I say me addressing my mental health is the number one thing that I'm so pumped up and excited to go back because now I can show exactly more of who I am. And that's the ability to actually really be able to communicate and connect with people.
On that, what do you think about the like middle class in both US and Canada kind of being wiped out because butter is like $9 a pound now for like 4 sticks of butter. And I know people that are making decent money that are still like they're starting to have to look at their bills and starting to have to budget. So how do you find reintegrating into that kind of world looking like?
I tell myself that I'm really blessed to be able to find a trade like being an electrician because I'm not going to have to worry about that thing through. I'm going to be one of the few people that really doesn't. On top of that, I'm a single guy with no dependents. I'm very thankful that none of that, when I get reintegrated, will apply to me. So that's where I talk about really taking the time to build your skills and investing and being as independent as possible. And for most people, it's going to be extremely difficult because they're in a spot where they're anchored down. They've got a family, they got kids, they've made certain investments. I really feel bad and sorry for them. It's a huge tragedy. I don't know how to address it. In terms of politics, the biggest changes happen when there's an uprising. I'm not advocating for some sort of bloody revolution, but it may have to come down to some sort of overthrow in a sense, because the way that things are headed, and that's where I hear more and more from people, is that they're struggling just to make ends meet, and they're doing all the right things. Like, what more can you ask? Somebody's working a full-time job, they're being responsible, and they're still having to struggle with some basic things here and there. I really see things like food banks being used more. So for a listener out there, if you're going through some struggles, Google and search resources that are near you. You'll be able to, maybe cut down on that food bill. You'll be able to access different things. And I think more and more people are going to be using those type of resources. But yeah, they're made technically for homeless and vagabond, but I see an expansion of that coming here in the future, and also maybe more and more government programs. Like here, we have a free cell phone program, self-service and stuff like that. You'd be surprised what you can come up on Google. So I really encourage everybody to be vigilant in searching, and you'd actually be surprised at what's going to come up. But I think ultimately, push is going to come to shove. That's why I really see more of a dystopia. I see more riots occurring, things of that nature. And at the same time, who the fuck are we voting for? Like, like certain times you have to be like, hey, we don't have anybody else to blame if you're just, if we're all just going to be sheep and complacent. Why are we bitching and complaining? Like, we're not trying to do anything major or serious. So just sitting at home and kind of having a negative attitude and accepting things, that's a surefire way of just continuing to lose. It's the trickiest scenario possible. But I would say that I really believe if there's a will and there's a way, and that you just have to focus on your situation individually. For me, thinking about it from the system standpoint of the middle class in this, it's too expansive, and it gets overwhelming, and it almost makes me, as an individual, want to kind of quit. But if I personalize it, and I'm like, Sham, what can I do right now to improve myself? That's the way to go. Just only think about the next step. So for anybody else struggling out there, just instead of trying to look at this whole system and politics and watch TV and argue and stuff like that, and just say, hey, what do I need to do in order to move myself forward in that step?
Yeah, I find it interesting though that like, because there comes a point where I think a lot of people find that they're somewhat hopeless. Like up here in Canada, we had that trucker convoy, and I went to the first 2 weekends of that, and it was really like a sense of community and whatnot. And but then at the end of the day, if you stay long enough, they freeze your bank accounts and you're in a worse spot than you were before when you were just trying to like be able to go to restaurants and like buy stuff again, you know?
Could you explain that last part of like stay too long and freezing accounts?
So, at a certain point, they identified people that were in the trucker convoy and they froze their bank accounts. So they had
The
access
government
to
did?
nothing. Yeah, the government in Canada.
What the fuck?
Yeah, that was a big thing up here. Um, so there were certain people that were active in the convoy, and then they figured out that the easiest way to get them to stop was to freeze all their bank accounts. So then people would be coming to the convoy with like propane and diesel and stuff like that and trying to keep the trucks going and whatnot. And then they started going after people that had gas jerrys, and it became kind of like a weird like symbol of freedom because people would carry empty gas jerrys on the street, so the cops would come and stop them, and then the guys with the gas jerrys that were full would just sneak by quick while the guys with the empty ones were getting stopped.
Uh, my mind is blown at how this is occurring in a first world country that's supposedly free and democratic.
It's crazy.
That was a fear. That's the fear of like going more and more digital. Is an outside party can come in and do that. So as an electrician, we install a lot of security measures and stuff like that. And there's like all these conversation, that might come up. Oh, this can be like easily hacked. So are you really that much safer? Like it's convenient, but are you really that much safer as opposed to you only being the only one that has access to the key? And that's what these banking transactions have become. So I don't know. I've known people that might hide away their wealth, in the form of gold or silver or bury money somewhere, stuff like that. I don't know if it's going to come down to people having to stash stuff away, but it's not feasible, for the average person. And that's why I say that, like, in a way, you can't really fight the system. You can only fight the system up to a certain point, and after that, you have to accept, hey, they might be too powerful for me to push them too far, and then you have to find the best way you can to survive within the system. So, even though I'm obviously not a quitter and I don't advocate for that, a logical viewpoint might be, hey, like, we're going to have to, we can't do this, or we can't do it up to a certain point. And we need to kind of swallow that loss for the time being as we plan a better approach, because we know that this approach is going to lead to destruction. So let's just hold our ground as we brainstorm another way, as opposed to keep visibly trying to attack.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, and like part of me too is like I don't want to live on my knees. And even with the podcast now, the Canadian government has obligated all the streaming services over like $1 million or $10 million in revenue to register, and so then the government will be able to see all their podcasts and content and all the viewers that see certain podcasts. So there's a good chance that this podcast might pop up on the radar of the Canadian government.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised. I was hearing things about Jordan Peterson going through a bunch of stuff with the government and censorship, and they're holding him accountable for this and that. I'm still shocked, like the details you're giving me, and it's good that you mentioned it, because the average person does not know that. They don't realize how many like constraints are being put at this point, and how many freedoms are in danger. It sucks for me to have to say, or even come up with a scenario where I'm saying, just like hold the ground as you brainstorm for something else. It's almost like you're trying to escape an abusive home and you have no resources and you have nothing. It's kind of like maybe trying to escape. You know you're not going to be able to do it conventionally, because it just leads to more and more beatings and abuse. So you sort of just like have to pretend to accept being a prisoner or a slave as you find an alternate route. So you keep trying different ways. It's like you're pretending to quit, in a sense, but you're always scheming and working behind the scenes. But at least you know that this method will not work. So by continuing doing it, you're just assuring your destruction. So it's not quitting per se, it's appearing to quit. It's being purposely docile, but your brain is constantly working for another attempt. Now you attempt that and you see how well it works. Try it a few times. Okay, then you reset. That's what I just feel like is the best overall approach, as opposed to just being like, hey, I'm fighting, look at me fight, look at how brave I am. Yes, you are, but you're not winning. So it needs to end.
I feel like that's part of why I'm trying to really get this podcast more on like how to be a vagabond and do like, yes, there is an influence of like, or not influence, but there is a part of it that is being dependent on what resources you have around. But I feel like if enough people sort of wake up to the idea that I don't have to live a conventional lifestyle, then we can actually get somewhat of a community just going and have an actual like haven almost, you know?
That's an amazing idea. And it ties in to kind of maybe me clarifying it not being a lifestyle and more of a phase. I spoke more on the fact that I think you want to have some sort of connection to society, to societal, like the backbones. You know, you want to have, because what you're doing is you're creating a different society, but that's a stable society. So I'm saying it's not a lifestyle as in like you're just a solo person doing whatever the F you want, but to be connected to community, I think is something that's essential. So that's a life, like a vagabond community, whatever. I could see that as a lifestyle, but just vagabonding kind of willy-nilly by yourself, for me, is more of just a phase thing. But if you're progressing it towards an actual, like, society that has institutions built to help different parts of your life, then absolutely. And I think the best way for people to kind of understand stuff is to get more into camping. You're in society, you've got a home, whatever, you're established. you want to get more into this, I really think if you get to be very good at camping, that's going to be your best entry point in order to do this lifestyle and build all the survival skills you can. And once you get comfortable operating outdoors and hiking around, carrying a pack on your back, you also need ways to make money. And that's where you're going to have to research what's something valuable I can learn that can make me some good cash, that I can make cash here and there pretty easily. And now you have a way to sustain that. So you've developed survival skills and you've developed a way to sustain that by a method of making money. Because you're going to need resources, obviously, to fund it. So I would say those are the two pillars. Be the best survivalist you can and find a way to make money easily and outside of the regular system, so to speak.
Yeah, I find it's like an odd balance between your skill set and how much you depend on the things around you. Like if you look at a dude like Dick Prenicky, he went up to Alaska for, I guess, his retirement, but he just brought a bunch of tool heads and then made his own tool handles and just built a log cabin and lived out there for years. And he, on his own, was able to create somewhat of a decent life for himself. So my thought was kind of if the vagabond community, once there's enough people willing to dive nose deep into it and then try and find something better, that together, if you go for that sort of lifestyle, you could live somewhat like the Native Americans did before like Western civilization here.
That's a great concept. It reminds me of on Netflix. Have you heard of Wild Country? I think it's called.
Was that the cult one?
Yes, this reminds me of a cult. I'm not saying cult in a negative way, but what these Rajneesh did in Oregon, which I'm from, they went to Central Oregon, bought a big piece of land, and they formed a community there. So I see a vagabond, concept following something like that, very similar. And what did those people have? They were able to fundraise and build something like that. So it requires making money within traditional society in order to fund something like that. And then you bring the community together, and they had a self-sustaining, city out there. So it's definitely been there, done that. It's definitely feasible. The funny thing is actually one of my teachers at the electrical training center. He was part of the group from Oregon that went to inspect that site after, it got disbanded. And he was saying they were able to get through a lot of loopholes because they did temp installations. So within code, you can get away with a lot more of things that are labeled as temporary, even though they're supposed to be living it permanently. You can find loopholes by doing things in a temp way. So that's a way to kind of hold off authorities. And then they also said that when they drained the pond, they found a shit ton of weapons. So when these people were fleeing, they threw all their weapons in this pond. So I found that was kind of like a little interesting side note that I had a teacher that went in as part of the inspection team.
I worked with a dude that was saying that he wanted a cottage and he had the land for it, but then he couldn't get the permit to accept like a living residence in it. So he poured the foundation and everything and he made a shed, but within that shed he had all the plumbing and electrical and it was just buried under the concrete and they knew like they measured it out and knew where it was. And then after it got inspected by like the city inspector or whatever, the home inspector, they came with jackhammers and just jackhammered out all the PVC pipes and whatnot and all the like electrical they needed and they built a full cottage.
That's awesome, man. That's ingenious. So that's what I envision a vagabond establishment as being. is they've got the blueprints, for by following these cults. It's been there, done that. It's feasible. And there's loopholes to exploit to kind of keep people off you and to buy your time. Unfortunately, for me, it sucks, but you know that society, the powers that be, are going to sniff that out, and they're going to do whatever it takes to constantly barrage you and try to bring you to news.
Like Waco.
It's about exactly. So it's hard to exist. It's hard to build up your own alternate society that operates like society, because it just naturally wants. They just naturally want to destroy that. It's almost like you're opposing them in a way by being too different or whatever. But who knows? I mean, I think it's definitely worth exploring. And it's great that you brought up the idea, because who knows what kind of brainstorming or things of that nature are going to come up. Or at least, being able to organize a convention, right? That'd be pretty cool to have some sort of like yearly meeting where you can get people together who are similar, who are vagabonds, and start from there.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, I don't know, what I kind of have in my head for the beginning of it would be like somewhat of what like the Amish community is like. But if you're a vagabond, you're more than welcome to come by and hang out and do whatever, you can come in the camp and maybe, I don't know, like learn a skill or two like related to what is going on there. And if you want to stay, you're welcome to stay. If you don't want to stay, like have fun on the road. We'll send you off with like a lunch or two so you don't get hungry.
It reminds me of like a video game, open world video game where they've got like an outpost, a vagabond
Yeah,
outpost.
yeah, exactly.
That's a cool concept. Yeah, no, that'd definitely be awesome. That's why I love the fact that this podcast exists, and for it to be shared. And any vagabonds or homeless, if you're hearing this, please feel free to pitch in, contact us, comment. I think the podcast has like an ability to comment directly on it, but reach out with your ideas. There may be something out there, so let us know.
Yeah, I just think it'd be cool to have like a place where you're generally like free. Like I'm sure there has to be a baseline amount of rules to it still, unfortunately, because just people aren't perfect. But besides that, I just want people to be able to explore what the world and they themselves have to offer.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. It's almost like crowdfunding to make people's. It's crowdfunding to be able to allow people to experience the unconventional. It's funny because somebody actually. So I once in a while, I think I said this in a previous episode, but I'll get a hotel rarely, very, very rarely. And I called this Uber, and he picks me up, and he saw my pack. He's like, just curious, like, what's going on? You traveling, this or that? And I told him my story. And he's like, man, it'd be funny if you did a travel service for people wanting to experience this. You know what I mean? So, and that's kind of what I did with that couple, Michelle and Nate. They reached out and I took them, and it's like, wouldn't that be a weird business idea, huh? Like unconventional travels. It reminded me of Rick Steves. I don't know if you've heard of Rick Steves, but he's like the most famous European kind of explorer. Not unconventional, but takes people on traditional trips in Europe. People contact him. He's got video series and all that stuff. I watched him on like public access or like a free channel growing up. Rick Steve's European Adventures or something like that. It'd be kind of funny to have a vagabond service of, hey, you want to explore, you want to see this lifestyle, come along with me, and then you charge a fee, and you're able to show people, things of that nature. But it'd be, or like the idea of, let's see.
I was thinking more like a monastery kind of, like, so you don't charge a fee, but if you want to donate, we're happy to accept. And, I don't want there to be like, I don't want
Oh,
money
for
to be
sure.
the forefront focus of it.
Yeah, I was like from an individual standpoint, I was saying like a weird travel service individually for me as a person. Now for like a group thing, like you're talking about, for sure. But the irony is like you have to somehow find a way to gain money, and most likely it's like through conventional means in order to build the structure and keep it running to have people access it, and then from there it's like hope for donations or what's to say that you can't be making money the entire time and then taking part of that money and reinvesting it into your business, that's what kind of is. It's a nonprofit business, but you're using your own funds to fund this. It's almost like we're all going out there and we're working and we're paying a union fee to that building in order to keep it going. These are great ideas just to be able to have community places for people like us.
Yeah. Yeah, because really, like nowadays, how do you even connect to people? Like, do you go to church? Do you go to your local mosque? Like, what do you do to actually be able to interact with people? Um,
That's the tough part. Yeah.
Part of me was thinking too about I don't know if you've seen this documentary. I'm pretty sure it's called Soldiers in Hiding, and it was a bunch of Vietnam veterans returning from war, where they just made like little villages or camps throughout like the Washington State Park, and they would live in there. Some would live isolated, some would live in a group, but they would just live off the land in that little like hub that they built. What's your
No,
opinion on that?
I'll definitely have to check it out. Um, for me, it's something I support, and wanting to do Vagabond and be on social media. A big part of it is I say that I want to use social media to be more social. That aspect is really missing. Nowadays, I believe most things are going to be instigated online, and then it meshes out. You meet in person type of deal. So I still do see like the internet driving a lot of it. In a place like Reddit that has a specific group to vagabonds, if you're proactive and you come up with a solution with plans, with something feasible, I think people will flock to it. They'll definitely have to take the time to write things down, have something formulated and then presented. But what these guys are doing is an amazing idea. And I was really hoping, joining a group like Vagabonds on Reddit, that I'd be able to interact with people in person. And thankfully, I was able to experience that. And throughout my various social media, by putting myself out there, I've got a network throughout the United States and Canada that I can access. So if I want to go to Michigan, somebody's like, hey, you can come stay in my cabin. I go here. I have this resource for you, Sham. So individually, if you take the chance to reach out, you can find that and then go from there. That's the only way you're really going to discover anything is by putting yourself out there. But I really, really hope, and anybody who's hearing this from any end, reach out to me. I broadcast where I'm at, and I've been fortunate to have people who are wanting to meet, and I think that's the greatest part, is making genuine connections. I go and I broadcast myself because I want to find genuine connections. And that's why I join certain groups that really cater to my interests, because I know more so than not it's going to be a hit, as opposed to going into society and trying to meet people, but it's harder if you don't have a shared background that you automatically know. And I think that's the power of the internet being used for good, is you have a lot of ability to filter things and give yourself a better chance and make connections with a wide variety of people. Because you're going to a club or a church or a gym or whatever, at least you have a common interest in stuff, but by narrowing it down, being part of something as selective as a Vagabond, I think you're more assured of an actual opportunity to have something social come about. So really, it's just about using the internet to facilitate all that.
Yeah. Would you say that the Vagabond community has kind of been like going to an MMA gym? Like, or no? Or are there more parallels you could draw than not?
Um, for me, yeah, in a way, because they're both subcultures. They're both something that deviates from the norm. So I could see that connection, and I think you're more likely to find. I don't want to use this in a bad way, but they're both quirky types. They're more so quirky, and for me, like people who do this, there's a certain predisposition you have, and you're just more likely to find people who are unconventional if they're going to be participating in a sport like MMA as well, because like vagabonding is generally frowned upon by the public, and you form camaraderie. It's like this hatred towards us empowers us and makes us closer together. I feel, or misunderstanding, right? You more likely than not, when you meet somebody who's a vagabond or who's into MMA, you're going to find somebody who's misunderstood. And there's just a more powerful connection, I think, when it comes about those meetings. I really think there's a stronger bond. It's like we're in this fight together. There's more of that hardy dynamic.
Yeah, it's like a sort of brotherhood just because there's. Would you say the others are what kind of form the brotherhood?
So what do you mean by that?
Like those that don't understand, like if you were to talk about being into MMA, um, like you've shared your background and you have been into MMA, and a lot of people I know that have been into MMA have gotten a sort of some version of like, oh, do you like hurting people or whatnot? Where for people in MMA, it's a sport and it's something that really just does wonders for yourself and your like mental health, well, physical being, mental being, and that somewhat like outsiders don't see what it is that does good for you from this lifestyle.
Oh yeah, yeah, totally. It's the misunderstanding people have. So for me, how I got into all of this was when I didn't like play sports. I played sports here and there my entire life, but I was never serious. And when I was in college, 19 years old, my friend Abe, who was a couple years younger, had gotten to jiu-jitsu, and he's like, "Hey, why don't you try it out?" So I went down to the local gym, tried it out, and I'm like, "Okay, this is cool." So we trained a ton, and we won a ton of regional medals and stuff like that. And he was still in high school, so no, he was in high school but homeschooled. And we started discovering how do we get people to the ground, because jiu-jitsu is a ground-based sport. Well, wrestling seems like the best way. I told him, hey, you should go to your local high school and join the wrestling team. So he did that. And I saw how much it improved him. And it was actually my former high school, which I'd gotten expelled from for fighting because somebody made a racist threat and I broke their nose halfway through my junior year, which is kind of funny. That's how I ended up going to college early, getting my GED, and then the rest is history. But how I got into sports was, through my friend Abe, and I told myself, hey, maybe I'll go to the high school and just be like a volunteer. Even though I'd never wrestled, I'll be like a chaperone or something like that. I'll just, whatever the hell they're going to accept me as, I'll take. But what ended up happening was I essentially just wrestled with the kids. I became a wrestler. We did that for 9 months, and my buddy, in his second year ever wrestling, got third in state, which is very, very good. And the local university, Oregon State University, which just happens to be one of the best teams in the United States, was taking notice of him, and they would always see me with him. And now we were training every day for hours. We were watching frickin' VHS tapes back then, and we would sneak into the university wrestling room because I was going to college there, and we'd sneak into the rec center, and we'd be grappling there. And it's funny because sometimes they'd come in, like a coach or whatever, open the door, and they'd see like me and him wrestling there in the darkness, essentially, with a spotlight, because we didn't want to alert anybody. So they got to know us and stuff like that. And he got invited to the Oregon State camp, and I essentially just snuck in. And here I am, like 20 years old, going to that college, like heading into my second to last year at Oregon State. And the coaches, well, they didn't fully know me, but they see me at this wrestling camp, and they approach me like, "Who are you?" I'm like, "I'm just a student here." And I was offered a chance to walk on somehow, which is just, it's a mind-blowing experience because it's something that's essentially, it's unheard of, you know, for a guy to have a year of wrestling experience, to be able to compete with, you know, for one of the top colleges in the country is weird, but I guess I had an athletic gift I didn't realize till I was 20 years old. That's an encouraging thing, I guess, because you never know what's inside of you until you try. I just happened to find that I was really gifted at wrestling, and I didn't discover it till late by chance. And that's how I got into wrestling. So I didn't, that year, because it was my last year, I didn't compete officially, but I practiced, and I'm like, this is a perfect entry into MMA. So after that, moved up to Portland and trained in MMA with Team Next Level. Nate Quarry was the main guy there. He actually fought for the middleweight title against Rich Franklin way back in the day. So he's a high-level competitor. There's other pros there. And I got to know Chael through his Mac Club because he was in Westland, which is near Portland. So I'd go there for another type of training. I like to diversify stuff. So I'd go to like a Muay Thai gym, boxing gym. I had my general MMA gym. I'd go to Mac clubs, things of that nature. But so I was just training a ton. You know, I was lucky enough to be an amateur MMA champ. And I was able to get in with Team Alpha Male in Sacramento, one of the best, probably the best lightweight team. Because I was at 150, I was 145, 155 pounder. I did cut a lot of weight. I was generally like 175, 180. But the reason I stopped was because as an amateur, you can't get paid, and the economy just tanked in 2011. And also, I was just untreated mental health. So for me, it was just like so much anxiety, having to try to make ends meet and stuff. And I called it quits then, but that was my career. That was where I was headed to be a pro fighter. And I trained, watching a lot of guys in the UFC. I'm like, I trained with you. Like Josh Emmett fought for the featherweight title. He was one of my training partners, you know. So I definitely would have seen myself in that capacity. And my goal was to do that as a profession until I got too old and then retired and went into something, you know, more conventional. Who knows what that would have been, but it wasn't meant to be. But when I did have to stop in the main and get into the job market, what ended up happening is I didn't have any experience. I had like these credentials. Wow, you know, Sham, you have an honors bachelor's degree, this and that, but I had no real world experience. And I listed MMA as one, and it never registered. And like you were saying, to do MMA, to do wrestling, you have to be incredibly mentally tough. That teaches you so much about life and perseverance and stuff like that. Like, it's a big skill, but nobody in the job market recognizes that. You know, like how valuable this person is. Oh, hey, you have a wrestler or somebody who does MMA, you're more likely to have a very determined worker. So that's kind of a funny, you know, that's a kind of an interesting scenario to kind of talk about your point and validate it and say that, like, yeah, there's a lot of benefit to it that the average person doesn't recognize. And in some ways you get punished because you get viewed as some brute or simpleton, like, oh, you're a wild guy who wants to get into a cage and do that. It's like, let's look at the actual, like, tangible stuff. Stop looking at it so much as just some sort of scrap.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely had that where people were like, oh, like, put like, so I have a second Dan in Taekwondo, and they're like, oh, put your second Dan in Taekwondo on your resume. It'll show your discipline and commitment, and no one really cares about that.
Yeah, exactly. So I experienced that. But the cool thing is that more and more of society is being able to accept it because of how mainstream UFC is. So I still do list it, and I'm actually finding. Well, I don't need to advertise. I'm part of the electrical union. I don't need to look for work, but just a general kind of interaction with people. It's become more and more of a positive thing. So I do think that the kind of tide has shifted.
All right, I have two questions off of that. One is, do you think that to be a pro fighter, you have to go all in and not do anything else, to where training is your life and that is what you do, like all or nothing? And the second question would be, what do you think is more important, striking or ground game?
To be world champion, you definitely have to be all in. I think to get started, as an amateur, you don't have a choice. You're going to have to work. And then once you become a pro, you're going to have to work up into a certain point until you have enough like sponsorship money to be able to just subsist. Maybe this even ties in with the Vagabond thing. People, they tend to kind of try to raise their standard of living, but maybe we need to accept that you need to lower your standard of living until you get to a certain point that you have the means to elevate yourself. So maybe in a sense we're living above our means, and we're thinking we need more and more, and we really don't. We just need to figure out a more efficient way of using our funds, you know? But I think in the beginning you have to accept the fact that, hey, you're going to have to grind like I was doing night shifts, because this is they train during business hours. This is their job. Pros, they're training during the day. I had to find a lot of just unconventional ways, schedules and ways to make ends meet. I think that's something that has to be accepted if you get into it. Unless you're like a high-level college recruit and you're being funded, by the gym itself or whatever, you're going to have to accept that you're going to have to work. But to truly be a master of your craft, you cannot be doing anything except training. I think the Dagestanis, Habib and that crew demonstrated that by, their father being involved their entire life and then roaming as a team in a camp around the world, and that's all they do. It's a very fortunate thing, but they work their freaking ass off, so it's a reward. Being able to train full time is a reward for investing in that. In terms of what's more important, I think grappling for sure is more important because I think the vast majority of fights eventually end up on the ground, even street fights and stuff like that. And wrestlers in general, somebody with a strong wrestling background, even Joe Rogan has mentioned that there's more world champions have come from having a more of a grappling ground background overall. Because it's almost like, hey, you can learn a pretty basic striking, like a 1-2, to gain an entry into a takedown, especially because you've got that cage to play. You're striking, which is naturally going to make somebody, even if it's not good striking, it's going to elicit a reaction, and that's going to have an opening for your takedowns. Whereas somebody who doesn't grapple and only strikes, you never have to fear them taking you down. And that's all they have to rely on. But I think it's easier to be a good striker than to learn how to be a decent striker than to be somebody who's decent at wrestling and taking down. It's just more physically intensive to be on somebody's body and grappling around and stuff like that, maneuvering in that manner. I think that's why I believe that wrestling is the most exhausting sport. It's anaerobic,
Yeah, for sure. I also just wanted to let you know that we're coming up on an hour. I don't know if you want to keep going, because I have a bunch more questions to ask, but if you got things to do.
I think it's perfect for, like, if there's anything else MMA related, we can end on that. And let's just end on something, I guess, something makes sense in MMA, wrestling, related question would be good, and then we'll call it good.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I think I got a good
we'll
one.
do that. Okay.
So I've been in contact with the BKFC tryouts. What would you say is a good background to have? So for me right now, the main issue is getting that professional license where you got to do a bunch of medical tests, obviously, like so you don't have HPV and whatnot. But what would you recommend for going into that sort of situation?
That's congrats, man. That's awesome stuff. That's a
Thank
big
you.
opportunity. Yeah, and that's maybe the overall toughest combat sport at the moment because of how brutal it is. But I think it's probably the most realistic thing we have, because that's just how we're meant to fight. Overall, in terms of without protection of your hands, I mean, obviously, I would say a boxing gym, and find ways to harden up your hands. I know a lot of times we would roll like bamboo on our shins and kind of tap them to get your shins dense in terms of kicking. Maybe look into methods of doing that with your
I'm
knuckles and things of that nature.
okay.
Or squeezing. There's different ways of your hand muscles. It's like being good on the tools. As an electrician, you develop really strong hands because you're working all these little muscles. So just all these little muscles within the hands, strengthening those, your wrists, stuff like that. I would say that's the number one thing. Is just actually because I haven't done that in the past, but for MMA, I joined specifically a boxing gym. So I would 100%, join a purely boxing gym where you're facing people that is like the one thing they do.
Okay. Do you think like welding could be beneficial to that?
I think anything that requires you to constantly use your hands for sure. And like any menial labor, I would say for sure has helped me, and just even within the gym doing I just always like to do little funky stuff, develop each finger, knuckles, things of that nature. But I would say, yeah, doing some sort of skill, like menial labor, something intensive, and going to a boxing gym, and doing whatever it takes to rough up your knuckles and get them, ready would be the best way for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely look into that. Yeah, I still gotta get like the license and everything figured out, but yeah, that's great advice.
No problem, man. Good luck with that. Keep me updated, and I think you put your mind to it, you're gonna be there. There's no reason why not.
Oh
You're gonna
yeah.
be competing there for sure.
Yeah, and you already know I'll shout out everything once I'm on there if I get there.
Oh, for sure. Oh,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, I think it's the persistence. How many times have we seen, you know, fighters who didn't start off even very well, and now they're fighting for titles? Like, who would have thought Sean Strickland was going to be the middleweight champ? Like, what the hell's going on there? Or there's guys who go on losing streaks, and all of a sudden, years later, like Charles Oliveira, he was a lightweight champion, and initially he was not very successful. Or Dustin Poirier, one of my buddies trained with him way back in the day when he was just like nothing, and it never envisioned that Dustin Poirier would be one of the best lightweights ever. But boom, Dustin persisted, and he, was super successful. So I think the main thing is to just never be discouraged, whether you lose first fight, first five, whatever. If you really want to do it, you'll get to a point where, you'll get there. You'll have some sort of success. But I would just keep pushing for sure. And I've been there. In terms of a fighting lifestyle, can be Spartan, having to rent one bedroom, sleeping on the ground, just operating with little money. But it's everything, the passion is what is fueling it. And I would just focus on that and giving yourself a chance by just fully focusing as much on training as you can and doing without kind of the luxuries of life.
Yeah, I appreciate the advice for sure. I have like a bunch
Yeah,
more questions to ask and whatnot, but you were saying you wanted to get to some Bellator fights, so we can cut it
yeah, oh
now.
yeah. I mean, the irony is it's awesome that we're talking about MMA and stuff, and I'm going to be watching some MMA, some Bellator lightweight, title action. Usman Nurmagomedov, Habib's cousin is going to be fighting, one of my favorite fighters. The whole family, I just love, these foreign fighters who dedicate themselves, in mountain training and just stuck to their principles. Just principled people living a pure life and loving to compete. So just to kind of show my support in a way and out of my enjoyment, I'm going to go off and watch me some fights.
Oh yeah, no, I 100% understood when you messaged me that. Um, and I feel like every one of the topics too that you messaged me, we could have a full podcast just out of that. So if you're willing to
100%.
come back
And
on,
for me,
we could just keep them going.
anytime. Anytime. And we can discuss even just off-topic stuff. It's like, what's your opinion on this or whatever, just because of the diverse backgrounds. And, I think people like us, I think vagabonds in general, we're more deep-thinking people, and we have just a bunch of shit racing through our minds, so it could be just a free-for-all. But I truly believe it could be a limited podcast, and I'd love to appear anytime you'd like. For me, it's a discussion. You're doing me a favor because the solitude can get to people, and the way to stimulate your mind is by interacting. You're doing me a favor, so I really appreciate it. I just, love to interact. I love to interact. And again, thank you for having me on. And every vagabond, homeless person, anybody listening, especially if you're struggling, stay positive. There's a community out there. Reach out on Reddit. Reach out wherever, but just realize that, people care and that you're worth it.
That concludes episode 18 of the Moonbase podcast. We have a lot more in store for you guys. More interviews with Quirky Blurky, an interview with a dude from Sweden, and an interview with a dude from Kiev. And he details some of what's going on there with the war. So stay tuned for future episodes, and I hope you enjoyed.